You all know how this goes. Without any further ado, let's cue the music and start that word chat.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming for another That Word Chat. It's always exciting. I say this all the time. I'm really excited about today's show. I'm excited about today's show. Corinne Jorgenson, we had as our first sort of live in-person That Word Chat. Some of you may have made that one. It was here in Columbus, Ohio at the ACES conference. And we did it live in with an audience, and then we also had it on Zoom. The sound was not great. We don't have it out on YouTube. One day we're going to get AI to fix the sound completely for us. Until that point, it's one that's not available to go back and look, but that's okay because we've got Corinne here now 2 years later. Corinne is a student at the University of Cincinnati, a PhD candidate at the University of Cincinnati. I'm wearing the black and red of University of Cincinnati here. And she has a new job we're going to ask her about as well. But Corinne, thank you for being here again, coming back and talking to us more about what you're doing.
I'm very excited to be here. And I have to say that word chat last time was probably my favorite conference experience I have ever had. It was just so much fun. So I'm so excited that you've asked me to come back because this is a ton of fun.
All right. Well, let's hope we can make it as fun as it was. I think we can. I mean, they're cool topics. So we want to talk about generative artificial intelligence, but there are other aspects of what you're doing as a student, what you're looking at that we also want to talk about. But let's start there. So 2 years ago, literally, it was a few months after the release of ChatGPT. And that sort of like woke everybody and changed everything. We said, oh my God, what is going on? The robots are taking over. Now it's 2 years later. Personally, my view is that there are some inherent problems to this model, using large language models to pretend to be intelligent people. But there's been some improvements. There's still some limitations, but let me get it from you. Where are we, and how do you feel about the state of generative AI now?
So 2 years ago, I think we were all just kind of shocked. We were kind of on our heels. This has come out. This is, a groundbreaking capability that none of us has seen before. And we all remember interacting with the chat bots of yesterday that were clumsy and had pre-scripted responses, and it wasn't anywhere near like a conversational interaction. And so I think when it came out, there was a ton of a natural reaction, which is fear of, is this going to take our jobs? What does this mean for us as professionals and as editors? Is this going to take over the world? And I think 2 years later, some of those concerns have been assuaged, right? But then we've come up with some new concerns because we see it in its strengths and in its limitations. So ton of novelty back then, but now we're seeing it become more deeply integrated into the products we use every day. At some points, I'll be honest, people aren't realizing that they're using generative AI tools when they are, because they're just kind of being seamlessly and quietly integrated into technology that we use every single day, from interactions with folks over the phone to education to even tools like Grammarly that we use all the time as editors. Um, and I think the conversation has moved from can it write, can it edit, to how do we use it responsibly? How do we use it well? How do we use it to empower us as professionals and as editors? Um, and I think it's actually changed the role of editing itself from gatekeeping. So I think editors kind of gatekeep or used to gatekeep, had the market cornered on correct grammar. But now editors have, I think, a bigger responsibility to curate, to guide, to have more of that higher executive function, cognition stuff layered into their work, more so than just focusing on did they or did they not use the serial comma appropriately.
Does AI, I don't know, does AI even, can AI pick out serial commas? I don't use it that much, to be honest, in terms of editing, because it's been limited. But
I
famously, like Perfected can't do a serial comma well.
Yeah, I actually think, do you mind if I take a minute to describe how these tools work, how generative AI
Yeah,
works?
that's a great,
Okay.
yeah.
I think a lot of people think that it's inferring, it's creating something from scratch. It's learning from you in real time and thinking and processing and reasoning and doing all of this stuff to give you an answer. And we are moving in that direction. But really, what ChatGPT and generative AI tools like EditGPT are very sophisticated statistical algorithms. And what they're doing is they're looking at your prompt, whatever you've provided, say, please put this in AP format, or please ensure that this doesn't use any serial commas or what have you. And it's going to its corpus of information that it's been trained on. And these models are trained on data that's basically a snapshot of the internet at the time they were trained. So it could have been, months or years ago. And what they're doing is they're making statistical inferences. They're trying to predict their responses based on what letter is more likely to come next in the word, what word is more likely to come next in the sentence, what sentence is more likely to come next in the paragraph. And so it's not really doing anything intelligent. It's just doing math, very sophisticated math. We're moving a little bit towards reasoning. It's not real reasoning, it's like a computational version of reasoning. But I think one thing that we need to realize is that it's not intelligent. It's just giving you statistically what it thinks is going to fit. It doesn't worry about correctness. It doesn't worry about accuracy. That's not its job. Its job is to generate a response based on your input and the most likely sentences, phrases, characters that are likely to occur based on what you've asked.
So you're a cognitive scientist, or
Yes.
psychologist, excuse me.
Yeah.
So your whole thing is how the brain works, and I'm curious how a whole bunch of different word combinations and your statistical approach to what comes next. How does that differ from what we do all the time with our own brains?
Yeah. So I kind of grown up in the domain of ecological psychology, and we ask not what your brain is in, but basically we ask what is surrounding you, what is providing you with the input that you get that help you to make decisions, interactions, all of that sort of stuff that we do every day. Tiny motions, me waving my hands, me making words come out of my mouth. And one of the things that's very, very different from us versus artificial intelligence is that we were constantly taking in information. We are constantly being stimulated by our environments, by our own personal ecologies, by our own personal histories. So even now, the room I'm in, the air has a particular smell, and maybe that's calling back to a time that I was in an office 15 years ago, and that's informing the sentences that I'm generating or the way that I'm speaking or what have you. You know, I am seeing a certain light level, and that's influencing my alertness, and that's influencing my energy level that I'm bringing to this. And artificial intelligence systems aren't sensing. A ChatGPT isn't sensing. It's not taking in information in real time. It's taking in a single prompt at a single time point and making inferences based on that data. So as you talk to me now, or if you were to nod your head or something like that, I'm taking in information about, you know, perhaps how you're perceiving what I'm saying. And that guides me in my, you know, in my response to you, into what I'm saying. And so what really sets our thinking apart from ChatGPTs is our ability to continuously integrate all of the information from our environment, our own personal ecologies, our histories, everything like that, to form intelligence. And ChatGPT can't do that, doesn't do that.
So I'm curious about where it's going, uh, and it seems like, I mean, we have made there are obviously a whole bunch of different uh, language models or different approaches. There's they keep sort of improving things, but then I also look at Apple Intelligence is supposed to have this interactive Siri. Alexa is supposed to be an interactive, and they're not out yet. They're sort of being promised, and they're running. And I don't know inside those companies what the problem is in sort of taking it to the next level. But I imagine it just doesn't work as well as they thought it would. So
I don't know. I don't know that that's necessarily the challenge. It's probably among them. It's probably, um, you know, is this accepting data inputs in the way that we want it to and making the inferences that we need it to? There's a new technology called RAG, retrieval augmented generation, that's making it possible to, you know, train models in, you know, on new data, like I do a little mini trading. So it updates its data and gives you more intelligent responses and things like that. All of these new technologies are really enabling it. And I would say the technology is not the long pole in the tent. The long pole in the tent is how do we use it ethically? How do we get these systems to interact with user data in a way that protects the users, that aligns, that is human aligned? Um, there's also sustainability challenges. There's all sorts of um, data privacy challenges, like how are we accessing our users' data? Are we sending all of that data over servers, exposing it to all sorts of risks from a privacy perspective? And so I think, you know, the technical challenge, people are coming a really long way. Engineers are coming a really long way with the sophistication of these systems. New models are released all the time. I mean, you can roll your own large language model that sits and lives on your computer pretty easily these days. It's probably an hour-long process if you've got, you know, a bowl of popcorn and a, you know, a wiki to follow and an hour to kill. You can do it yourself these days, and you can incorporate RAG so that it knows everything about you and your company and all of that stuff. So it's not, I think, the technology that's holding companies like that back. I think it's all of those other kind of softer implications that are really challenging companies from releasing these things, you know, to the broader public. That's just my sense.
yeah, I see, you know, the free thing I get when I use Google, and Google gives me an answer, and sometimes that answer is great, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's misses the point, or it gives me inaccurate information, and that seems like something it shouldn't be doing. But is that an inherent problem that simply can't be overcome, or are we evolving to fix that?
That's a great question because a generative AI system, like I said earlier, does not care about being correct. It just wants to give you the results of its predictive algorithm to say, this is what I think you want. But what we're seeing now is something called agentic AI. And these are ensembles of artificial intelligence systems with different roles. So you have perhaps a large language model that's responsible for doing what ChatGPT does today, generate the responses based on your prompts. In an agentic AI system, maybe that's attached to a generative AI system whose sole responsibility is to go do a fact checking exercise on the output of the large language model before you see it. And perhaps there's, a discriminative system that's incorporating some real-time data into the results of whatever the prompt is giving you. So what I think is really funny is today you can go to Bing or Google or whatever, and you can put in, please explain purple llama sandwich dogs. And it will explain for you purple llama sandwich dogs as if that's a thing. Like, I don't know what purple llama sandwich dogs are, but it will explain to you what that is. I would think I should actually look that up later. It'll generate something
I,
for you.
somebody will.
But yeah, right. It'll generate something for you based on that predictive algorithm of the words
Yeah.
that it thinks is going to have a relationship to each other. But in the future, we're going to see more of these agentic systems that are doing the fact checking in the loop before you see the results. And so hopefully problems like that go away or at least become uh, occur less frequently.
Well, it occurs to me that what I do when I see something that is suspect, and this is just me being curious and going down the rabbit hole, but I'll see an answer and I'll think, is that really a thing? And what do? I Google it, and and I find out, oh, that this is something that doesn't exist, or maybe it is something that exists.
Yeah, yeah.
But you think if Google would, if the AI would Google the answer, then it could,
That's essentially what it is. That's
yeah.
essentially the role of that second system is to go out and Google it.
Okay. So you said that the integrations are becoming seamless, and so we may interact with AI and not know it. I know I've had a couple of spam phone calls where I've answered the phone. I usually don't if it's an unrecognized number, but where I'm pretty sure I'm not talking to just like your basic old fashioned chat robot, but I'm perhaps talking to a AI generated voice. I don't know. So how do we know? How do we deal with these sort of ethical issues if we can't even tell what is AI and what is not?
Yeah, it's a really tricky problem because once these systems go out into the world, you can't really tell people, you can't change what they're going to do with these systems. People are going to use these systems in whatever way is advantageous to them. And so you can't police a system very effectively once deployed. But that's where I think research into kind of the human factors of artificial intelligence comes to play, because it's up to us to develop the heuristics that drive the performance of the system. What rules are the systems going to follow to make sure that they're aligned with human values and human needs? And that concept is called human aligned systems. Um, and so, from a research perspective, we have a lot of questions that we need to answer about what constitutes a human aligned artificial intelligence system. And that's actually, one of my areas of research is going and saying, are the rules that we follow in interpersonal uh, interactions, like if I were chatting with you or chatting with Heather, are those the same rules that an artificial intelligence system should follow, right? The same norms, the same way of demonstrating politeness and respect and all of that stuff. The same way of explaining our decisions and things like that. Are the rules the same? And I think right now we're assuming that the rules are the same. But is that true, right? And how do we understand those rules a little bit better? How do we research into those rules to develop better systems themselves before they leave the research and development environment, before they leave the engineering environment and go into production? How do we develop more human aligned systems? I think it's up to the researchers and the developers to make sure that we're putting systems out that really do operate in alignment with our values, in alignment with what we need.
So here's a question, and of course, I always look at this from the point of view of an editor. Is there advice for we talk about one of the concerns with ethics is naming the source, and we do see that a lot of blogs will say AI contributed to this, articles will say this. And I wonder how necessary. What advice would you give in terms to somebody who is publishing and wants to use AI, and what advice would you give in terms of what is really necessary in terms of revealing that, being open with that, and at what point? I mean, if it's simply saying, "Give me an outline for something that I could do on my own, but it would just take me longer." Is that something that we need to say ethically? We need to say this is AI contributed.
That's a really good question, because there's ethics on both sides of this, right? There's ethical implications of the systems themselves, and there's ethical implications of how we use them and how we present that to the world. So I appreciate you asking that question. And I'm going to give an example from a research proposal that I worked on recently. They asked for the folks submitting the proposal to disclose whether or not they've used generative AI. And so I don't think that anybody who uses a computer can authentically say that they do not use generative AI. These tools are being incorporated in software that we use every single day in a way that we may not be aware of, right? So there's no way for us to say, no, I didn't use generative AI unless you used pen and paper and then handed that pen and paper off to somebody else. There's just no, unless, it just doesn't, interact with the digital world at all. A second proposal I recently saw, I do a lot of work in proposals, said that disclose if you've used AI to generate your technical ideas, to develop your understanding of your solution better than you already know it. And I think that that's kind of a perhaps better qualifier for what we should disclose. If you as an editor are using it to check the latest news on what AP style says, I would suggest that that's probably not the best use case for AI because of the way that it's developed. But to me, that's not something you should have to disclose, right? But if you use AI to write an entire article for you from scratch, I would say, is that really your work? Is that credibly your work? And in that situation, I would say probably err on the side of disclosing. I think people have gotten so attuned to what AI generated content looks like and sounds like and reads like that what we're seeing is distrust in that content once we see those common openers that in a world where, or in the complex technological landscape of, or et cetera, when we see those common phrases that generative AI uses, we start to distrust that content. And so I would say probably just don't use generative AI to write whole articles, right? But in terms of disclosing, do you have to disclose that you're using Grammarly and Grammarly uses generative AI now? To me, that's no, right? That's going back to the days of spell check and saying, do you are you a real editor or not? And if you don't use spell check, I don't know. It's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. So I think unless you feel like you can't credibly claim the work as your own and use your own, conscience on that, I feel like maybe err on the side of not disclosing.
Mhm. Interesting. If there are questions from the room, please ask them, and we'll try to get to them. You mentioned AP Style Book. It reminded me of early on. I asked probably ChatGPT what to give me the top 5 rules in the AP Style Book, and it did it. It was a very funny. It got a couple of them. It was great. And a couple of them, it said, always use the Oxford comma. And another one was something about a part of speech that didn't exist. So it was a mess.
Yeah.
But AP Starbook is a you have to pay a subscription to look at it. It's not available to grab. Now I did this recently. Again, same question. The answers were spot on. The answers were all from AP Style Book. So, ethically, what am I to think of that? AP Style Book does not give away its content freely, but of course, if you're clever enough to scour the internet, everything in the AP Style Book, at least except for maybe the most recent stuff, is there somewhere to be found. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So, what is the ethical thing going on there?
That's one of the really complicated challenges, and probably part of what holds organizations like Microsoft and Apple up from deploying more sophisticated AI systems into the environments that we're already using, is that the libraries, the corpus of data that these systems are trained on, often includes stuff that's proprietary, copyright, in some cases, um, nationally sensitive information, stuff that, did they have permission to collect that information to use it? And then is it an ethical thing for them to generate content based on data that's collected unethically? And that's kind of an open question, right? I think the we're trying a little bit to close the barn doors after the horses run out. I'm not sure
Yeah.
that there's a way to change this because it's already happened, and I'm not sure that there's a way for us to get around it. But there definitely do need to be approaches for organizations like AP Style, the folks who write the AP Style Guide, to see the benefit that they would otherwise derive from the systems, the payments for their use, from that generated content. So we store cookies in our computers all the time. Maybe, the cookies that are attached to the ChatGPT responses are a way to track which tokens are, from which content, and maybe give that credit back to the original author of the data.
Okay, we have a question from the room.
We do. This one's on behalf of Karen, who can't come on microphone, so I'm gonna ask on her behalf. Should editors not only disclose AI use to clients, but also have an indemnity/legal verbiage that there may be copyright issues because of what the AI was trained on?
So I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a lawyer.
You're everything, Corinne.
I may be many things, but that's a hat that I've never wanted to wear. So I think in your agreement with your client, it may make sense for you to have an AI policy. Describe the ways that you will and won't use AI while doing their work, so that you are being upfront and transparent about what you're doing. And then beyond that, as long as you're aligning with your own policy, I don't think you need to go further in disclosing the way that you use artificial intelligence to your clients. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, from a non-legal standpoint, I think it makes sense. Yeah, but it is. I mean, I think it is evolving too, because as you say, we could find that it becomes so integrated that it's very difficult for us to distinguish even ourselves when we're using it and
Yeah.
when we're not.
Yeah.
Let me shift a little bit, and you mentioned a little bit about what you're studying. You're at your dissertation phase now. So what's your research focus at this point?
I'm looking at the interaction between a human and a system like ChatGPT and the role of explainability in making more human aligned systems. Um, and the idea behind that is that explainability could create trust, and trust could enable better cooperation. This is true, I think, in the human world, right? In editing and writing. Is it also true in human AI interaction? So, does explainability make it that we are more likely to trust these systems? What do those explanations consist of, and at what level? Is it related to a specific interaction, or is it related to the policies that the generative AI tool has been trained to use? Um, so really, what I'm asking is, do explanations create more trust in systems? And does that trust then, help us to create things that are more human aligned with our values, aligned with our needs?
And famously, people who work on the system say they don't understand, they don't know what's going on inside. So how much of can you explain where ideas are generated?
Yeah, and there's all sorts of levels of explanations that it could provide. A developer may be interested in one type of explanation, something that's deeply technical, something that's even perhaps mathematical. And that's very different than the explanation that I generally want from ChatGPT, which is to say, I access this link in collecting this information, and it it sent me here. You can verify the information that way. That's perhaps
Yeah.
the level of explanation that I want, but that's not sufficient to, clear up the black box nature of generative algorithms. So there's got to be different functional explanations at different user categories or different user levels.
And so you would be an advocate of, I know some uh, responses will give you links for further information and to sort of explain where they got it, and then some. I think ChatGPT doesn't give you any indication of where it got the information. Is that
You can actually, I think, request it from ChatGPT. You can say, I'm interested in this, please cite your sources. And it will give you a link or something like that, but you have to specifically ask for it. Um, if One of the tools I have is I've kind of rolled my own generative AI that I mentioned this earlier, lives on my computer, and it uses retrieval augmented generation, RAG, to generate its responses. And so one of the things that it default does is it brings up the exact papers from which it created those inferences, those documents that I've loaded into it. And, you know, the jury is still out on how much this impacts our ability to use our system, generative AI systems, our trust in those systems, how much we perceive them as ethical and things like that. But I would say, over time, we probably will see some way to, default retrieve some of that attribution information to verify perhaps the veracity or um, the copyright or something like that.
so what systems do you use, and other than your own? Actually, let me go back. I was curious to know, when you use that sort of a system where you're using your own content to generate responses. I've never done that, but I imagine that's kind of weird at times when, I mean, do you find that you recognize your voice in the responses?
Yeah, that's great. I think even ChatGPT does this now. So ChatGPT has incorporated something called memory. So it's essentially, I think it's a process similar to retrieval augmented generation, going through the history of all of your chats while it's responding to you and incorporating, your specific syntax, the way you sound, the way you write, the way you construct sentences. So you can ask it, generate this in my voice, please. And it will come up with something that is perhaps a little bit more authentically you than if you had not asked it to do that. Um, I Super cool, also super dangerous because I'm sure it could be used for wildly unethical purposes. And we see some of that in the way that people are creating like deep fakes these days. Um, so I don't know. Yeah,
Well,
it's
I
definitely a
suppose it,
challenge.
yeah, and it reinforces certain things, certain maybe quirks that are uh, usually those are probably familiar and fine and wonderful, but sometimes they may not be. And we've had a lot of uh, um, output from these models early on that don't distinguish between uh, racist language and normal language if they're going to the wrong parts of the internet or looking at the wrong books or whatever. And also, I suppose the bigger example is that they're mostly English. They're published, mostly published. So you have this bias toward a certain type of speech and a certain socioeconomic status and a certain skin color. And so, is there that danger that this the artificial intelligence simply reinforces those sort of the class that controls things?
Yeah, huge concern. I think that was one of the biggest problems in early generative AI is that it was just it, there were no, speed bumps in the way. There was nothing checking that bias or anything. I think as time has gone on, there are, little hyperparameters within the algorithms that help perhaps tune out some of that bias, especially, perhaps the more, you know, racist biases that were really problematic in early generative AI outputs. But the reason that happens is because those biases are so prevalent in the data that these tools are trained on. So it's not necessarily being racist on its own, it's just being reflective of racism at the level of data. Um, so this creates a problem, right? So as these tools generate more data that's biased towards a certain group or um, just a certain group, for example, and creates more output, are we moving that bias needle even further in the wrong direction? Um, this is another place where researchers and developers have to work, fairly closely together to build in those safeguards to stop perpetuating those biases. And I think we've seen a lot of success in that. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than it was. Um, it still stands to be significantly improved. We're not there yet.
Yeah. Well, and I imagine the easy way is to flag what seems to be inappropriate or racist or sexist or biased in some other way and avoid saying that. But that doesn't actually get to the problem of the lack of voices through people who aren't publishing on the internet.
Yeah.
Are you aware of any efforts to sort of broaden its sort of knowledge or background in that way?
So there are efforts to fine tune the way that the data is trained, the fine tune the training data rather. such that it removes some of those inherent biases and makes it such that the voices appear statistically to occur at similar levels. So there's also efforts to neutralize perhaps terms that neutralize the effect of terms that could imply, you know, could support racism, for example, in generations. So things like, I think there's been a lot of effort in the hiring process, generative tools that are supporting the hiring processes. And one of the things they're doing now is removing locations, zip codes, removing first names and last names, removing any reference to gender, all of that stuff before it goes into the training data so that you can try to debias the training data. Some other things that they're trying to do is rewrite, or not rewrite, but neutralize content so it doesn't appear to be, for example, written by a particular group, right? Or a person from a particular group. My content is probably inherently different because of my background than yours is, Mark. And we share a lot of groups in common, but we have a lot of groups that are different. But trying to neutralize that content so that it is, more accurately representative of kind of a general group than specific groups. So you've got it a couple different layers. You're removing indicators that point to particular biases, things like referencing my sex or gender on my resume, for example. Not that I really have done that. My first name and last name, the location where I live, my zip code reveals data about me, right? So getting rid of those before the system is trained. And that helps to debias a little bit.
It's a very interesting problem, and I don't want to. I want to ask you some stuff that's actually not related to AI.
Can we
But
talk about crocheting, maybe?
crocheting, well, rock climbing, I think is maybe more your speed.
Or
But
rock climbing, yeah.
yeah. Well, no, but I do want to actually, I do want to get into, well, I was interested in cognitive psychology and copy editing. I'm going to propose that a copy editor is in some ways a cognitive psychologist, and that we are looking at taking what somebody says, somebody writes, understanding what they mean to write, and then presenting that for a general audience for people so people will understand. Now, maybe that's just my nickel version of what cognitive psychology is, because it's not something I'm terribly familiar with. But what can copy editors like me take from the field of cognitive psychology?
So I love that question. There's just so many things, because the role, especially considering the way that the role of the editor has changed with tools like ChatGPT. So really, what editors are doing is very high level, higher order cognition. And so they're making inferences about the direction of the story or the intent of the author or the audience that's relevant to the content that they're editing, and incorporating all of that information, using their working memory, using their long-term memory, using their own, personal ecologies, which we talked about earlier, to create a more cohesive story, to do better storytelling on behalf of that original author. And this is something that I think really differentiates the human editor from the AI editor, is that where human editors have a limited capacity, AI editors have unlimited capacity. Where human editors really shine is that we have understanding, and AI editors have no understanding. So think of it as an intern, right? Think of ChatGPT as an intern with unlimited capacity and absolutely no understanding.
Okay. Um, I let me switch back now a little bit. Because I didn't want to, we have a little bit of time, but I don't want to run out of time. And I feel like we haven't really hit on the whole sustainability issue with
Mm.
artificial intelligence. And I mean, I know you have Google and saying, you know, well, maybe these goals for sustainability that we set for ourselves, I guess they aren't really going to work because now we have this um, artificial intelligence, which takes up a lot of energy. So what do we do about that?
Well, let me tell you, I've got the answer. We're going to
Oh,
solve
good,
it
good,
right
good. All
now.
right,
No,
perfect.
I'm just kidding. It's a tough problem. And just for those who perhaps don't know about the sustainability challenges of artificial intelligence essentially um, generative AI tools, they function out of data centers. And these data centers are massive, massive facilities with sometimes thousands, tens of thousands computers in them. And so every time you submit a prompt to ChatGPT, the data is being relayed over the internet to one of these servers. The server is running its process against its training data. I'm sorry, they're running the process against training data to try to generate that response, and it's spinning up the CPUs in the data centers. It's making them very hot. And so one of the things that computers need is they need a cool environment in order to operate. So what that means is many of these facilities are either cooled by air conditioners or in a lot of cases, water cooling, where they pump cool water through little tubes that run across all of these processors and help cool them down so that they can work. And so these tasks that we're giving ChatGPT are very computationally expensive. They're very hard for computers to churn on how to run. And so they generate a lot of heat, it requires a lot of water. Um, One thing that I'm seeing recently is that the organizations that have these systems, like OpenAI, for example, the parent company that owns ChatGPT, is starting to issue guidance on how to mitigate your own personal impact on that. So what they're saying is, for example, use fewer words in your prompt. Don't bother saying please anymore because every additional word is has some computational tax, which has a cooling tax. Um, Try to be as concise as possible. You know, try to make as few prompts as possible. So try to just be more efficient in your prompting. And I think that that's an interesting approach because we as users are very interested in how we can affect change. How do we affect, an improvement in our own impact on this? But this is a much bigger problem, right? There's nobody regulating this. I don't know if regulation is the right answer, but there's nobody saying, how do you do your carbon offsets for these sorts of things? How are you offsetting the water usage, things like that. So it's a much bigger problem than saying don't say please in your prompts anymore. You might make a little bit of a difference, but it's the problem is going to be with those systems that we use now that use generative AI and we just really don't know about it because they're generating prompts all the time, right? At a magnitude much, much, much higher than what the general lay user audience is doing. So it's a big problem. And for the lay user, I'm going to guess that your individual impact is really quite small. You can make your prompts more efficient if you are interested in contributing positively. Um, but unfortunately, I think the problem is bigger than like you or me.
Yeah,
I don't know. I use ChatGPT a lot. Maybe I'm a power user who's a
you're part of
problem.
the problem. Yeah, and it is. I mean, it is hard to. I mean, in some ways, I mean, an easy answer is don't use ChatGPT, don't use generative AI. But it is a tool that has some great potential and great use. But it does seem like companies will say, well, we had this idea that what we expected, we're going to be sustainable, but that's all out the window, and we're just going to, ruin the world by, I mean,
Yeah.
you could actually see the artificial intelligence won't destroy humanity by taking over, but simply by sucking all the resources out of
Yeah, that's going to be the problem. It's not because it enslaves all of us. Perhaps it will, but before that, it will drain all of our resources.
it, right? Which maybe is this first step toward the second.
Yeah, right.
Um, what do you use? I'm sure you use different things for research,
You
but
did ask me that. Yeah.
did I ask you to? Yeah, I thought I did, and then
I
I don't
didn't
remember if you gave an
answer.
answer.
I
Yeah, okay.
dodged the question. I dodged. So I use Llama, I think 3.2, one that I've rolled my own. I use ChatGPT most frequently. I've come to rely on it quite a bit. It knows my tone of voice. It has a lot of information about the history of me. I can ask it stupid questions like, I have this particular bike. What does this particular bike say about my personality? And it comes up with a response that's actually eerily accurate. I use Jenny AI, JENNI.ai. Um, it's a tool specifically for researchers to get credible citations as you're writing research papers. Very cool tool. Um, I also use Perplexity quite a bit because I really appreciate the way that Perplexity cites its sources, and it gives me direct access to research papers, articles, things that I can pull from and use credibly in my work. Um, I would say that those are my top four.
Mhm. Okay. Is there something as an editor if I want? I haven't. I've used some editing tools on a limited basis, and found them actually. Sometimes they are good suggestions, and usually they're not going to do much better than what I did myself or would do myself. Does not say I don't sometimes do find something that there's a good suggestion there. Um, but I don't use it that much. Should I be? And is there a tool that editors will find useful?
I'm going to say something somewhat controversial. I think every editor should be using a generative AI tool if you want to stay relevant and competitive as an editor, because what AI is doing is it's elevating our capacity and it's elevating our capability as professionals, as editors. And so your peer editor is going to be doing it. The person you're competing for a job, uh, with again for a job is going to be using it, whatever. It's going to become a necessity. There are tools specifically tuned to editing. One of them is Edit GPT. I haven't used that one personally, but I've heard wonderful things about it from editors I trust. Grammarly does a fairly good job, and that's an AI tool now. Um, I also think that Perplexity is a really important tool for editors because you can do your fact checking and go find credible sources for your information or verify that something is completely inaccurate. So I think I think those are probably three worth considering.
Okay. Hey, Heather, you had a question sort of related. We've got a few more minutes. If anybody has any final questions,
I
please ask
did.
them in the.
I read Technically Wrong back in 2017. It's about built-in biases and algorithms. And I was wondering if there were any like books you had on your bookshelf that are just like great places for people to start if they're a little bit unfamiliar with some of these algorithms things are based on, just to learn more about AI in general and be more informed.
I love that. I love that. I've not read that book, so I'll have to go back and read it. I love the alignment problem. I think this is a great place to start for learning about systems like these and the challenge of doing human aligned systems. It's called the alignment problem. It's very good.
Alignment problem.
Thank you.
And recent, I assume.
It is fairly recent. I I'm struggling to remember the publication date, but it's I think within the last 5 years.
Heather's already
It
on it.
is
She's gonna.
2000 and it's 2020.
All right.
Oh yeah. Thank
Much
you.
sooner than my 2017.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's slightly pre-generative AI, but the foundation of artificial intelligence is in there for anybody who's interested.
And you, Corinne, you're I think you said October. You're hoping to. Now you don't have a scheduled yet.
I don't have it scheduled, and the way that PhDs go is that, they expand to fill the space they're allowed. So I've given myself a deadline of October to create a constraint, like PhDs and cats and gases, they expand to fill their container, right? So I've given myself an October deadline. I think I'm going to be able to do it. We'll see.
Yeah. All right. Well, when it happens, let us know because we'll want to
Thank you.
celebrate
I will
with
let you
you.
know.
Yeah.
I'll
Excellent.
let you know.
And also we found out we said you've been with um, Dragonfly editorial down the road in Tip City for a few years, and you're in a new job. Congratulations, doing the
Thank
same
you.
thing, kind of.
Today is my first day. So this is great because I've been learning by fire hose all day, and this is a lovely break for my brain. Um, yeah, I'm the proposal director for a company called Parallax Advanced Research, and they serve organizations like DARPA and AFRL to do better human machine teaming. And I'm super excited to join the team and hopefully help them win more work and make a difference for the folks on the other end, which is the warfighter.
Yeah. Okay. And is that the office? Are you in the office now?
Yes, I am in the office. This is not
Oh.
my office. I
Oh.
am squatting.
Oh. Okay. Cincinnati or Dayton or
It's in Beaver Creek.
Where's Beaver Creek? I don't know my geography.
Beaver Creek is just outside of Dayton. I can see the skyline if I were to go to the other side of the building. I can see Dayton skyline.
Okay. So it's a good commute for you,
It's like 20 minutes, so can't beat it.
right? Okay. All right.
Not as good
Well,
as working from home though. That was a
Yeah.
30-second commute. I liked that a lot.
yeah, there's that. Yeah. Um, yeah. Is there a work from home component in this? You're not in the office
I
full time.
I think so. It's just a little bit more
Yeah.
effective to do it in the office.
Mm.
You know the challenge.
Right. And with when anything military, there's also
Oh, all sorts
challenges, I'm
of
sure.
extra considerations. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, well, thank you so much. I mean, this is great.
Yeah.
It was so great to talk to you 2 years ago. It was so much fun, and now it's 2 years later. It's so much fun again. And good luck with the dissertation process,
Thank you.
the new job, and we'll see you again sometime soon.
Thank you. I look forward to that. It's great talking with you.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks so much, everybody.